What's a convention without a protest? Left-wing activists are reportedly planning to protest Kamala Harris's presidential nomination at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago next week. And here to discuss is Julio Rosas, Blaze Media national correspondent. So, Julio, why is the far left so up in arms? Aren't they about to get the most diverse presidential candidate in history that we've ever seen? Isn't this what they want?
Yes, to a point, and that's interesting that you bring that up. But the main gripe for this year has been the war in Gaza against Hamas, and so the reason why the far left is organizing for protests all week as opposed to the RNC, which was only one day, is because the Biden-Harris administration has been the one in charge during this war, and obviously there hasn't been a ceasefire, there hasn't been an arms embargo. Which is one of the things that they're calling for, and they're generally supportive of Israel, at least when it comes to rhetoric. So all that combined just doesn't make the far left very happy. And so, like I said, we were there for the RNC. There was only one day of protest, and that was just mainly because Trump hasn't been in charge during this time. And so they put the quote unquote genocide at the feet of the Biden-Harris administration.
Julio, and that hasn't changed over the course of time. I mean, now that we have Harris, I mean, we expected these to be, we've been talking about it for months, right, to be pretty big. You think is it going to change now that Kamala is in charge?
No, and even with Walz, who is from Minnesota and has the backing of the likes of Ilhan Omar and kind of the squad, it hasn't changed, and it's because, I mean, we're dealing with like the furthest of left when it comes to the Democratic coalition. So yes, they were slightly more optimistic with Harris because she hasn't been directly in charge, right? She's number two. They were very unhappy with Biden. But when they had their meeting, the main march, the march on the DNC, when they had their meeting after Harris was named to be at the top of the ticket, they did ask, does anyone have any issue with continuing this planned protest at the DNC? And no one took issue. And so they're going full steam ahead. They still very much blame Harris to be part of the problem in their eyes. And then we saw this recently from last night in New York City when Harris didn't even show up to this fundraiser, but you had top Democrats at the city and national level have a fundraiser for her in Harlem, and the same kind of within our lifetime organization rallied outside, and things were kind of fine. But then when the after party started, and they followed those people inside the restaurant and bars, and that's when things got out of hand. And so I think that's going to be a little bit of a preview of what's to come for the DNC, because it's not just the United Center, but it's also potentially where the delegates and their friends are going to be staying at the hotels in downtown Chicago.
Now, all protests are not created equal, but do you expect this to be more violent than any of the protests that we've seen? We saw a lot of violence in 2020. Do we anticipate that getting back to any of those levels?
I think so. I think one of the friction points, one of the potential flashpoints to get things going in terms of getting violent has been the route. The protesters have argued for a larger route that doesn't have as many turns because they say that's going to create bottlenecks and create a safety hazard. The Secret Service and the city said that they can't accommodate that march, and actually a judge just ruled this week that they are going to permit for the shorter route that the city has put forth, because they also said that by going further along the security perimeter of the United Center, that also can create a hazard because the fencing that they put up is not flexible, right? So if people start getting pushed up against the fencing, it could cause kind of injuries and potential deaths when it comes to a stampede, should something like that happen. And so the reason why I say that is because when Netanyahu spoke last month to Congress, the marchers tried to push past the security line and try to push past officers, and obviously the officers weren't going to allow that, and that was one of the things that kind of kicked things off for turning violent. So it's really anyone's game. I mean, the conditions are being created, and they will be in place for things, because it takes just one little small thing to kick things off. I mean, it could be any number of things, right? So I think with the number of people that are there, the still anger that these people are feeling, I think it has a very high possibility. Again, in weatherman terms, it's definitely over 50%.
Julio, can you explain quick who is organizing these and how they're organizing it on the one side versus how the Democratic Party leaders are planning to respond to it?
So it's things. I mean, we have Code Pink, we have the Answer Coalition, you have the local DSA. I mean, there's over 100 organizations that are at a minimum endorsing the march, and then there's going to be obviously people who are going to be participating. There is concern within Democrats. Politico had a good piece out back in May where Democrats are concerned at how Mayor Brandon Johnson is going to allow the police to respond, because the Chicago police superintendent has made it clear that they're not going to tolerate any violence, that there's any hint of violence, they're going to move in and shut it down quickly. But he has to answer to the mayor. And the mayor is he kind of comes from that far left coalition. He definitely has the sympathies towards the protesters. And in that piece from Politico, there's this joke that unlike the 1968 convention where Mayor Daley basically let the cops do what they had to do to shut things down. The joke is that the mayor is on the side of the protesters this time as opposed to police. And Mayor Brandon Johnson has not been an ally to Chicago police at all during his tenure. He's made that clear. So it will be interesting to see how those dynamics play out, where you have a mayor who is probably going to pressure Chicago police to let protesters get away with as much as they can before probably things get out of hand. So that's why there's so much concern, because it's obviously not just coming from the protesters, but now it's also coming from the top.
Things look fairly unified on the right, with people getting behind Donald Trump. But you mentioned the war at the top between Israel and Hamas, and that leading to some tension. So how do these protests reflect the bigger divisions right now within the Democratic Party?
Well, it speaks to how there is that divide between where they try to have the minority Olympics, right? Because on one hand, you have the Palestinians and Muslim coalition within the United States. And then on the other hand, you have the Jewish, where they have the donors and just the general New York City Jewish support and things like that. That's one of the reasons why kind of these cities have such democratic strongholds. And so that's why Biden had such a hard time responding to this problem. And Harris has had an equally hard time responding to it, because no matter who they even give just a little bit of support to, the other side is just going to go completely ballistic. And so we saw that recently where some protesters in Michigan started to interrupt her during her speech. And she said, yeah, you can keep saying that, but if you want Donald Trump, but I'm speaking right now. And I saw a lot of, again, the far left pro-Palestinian anti-Israel coalition kind of saying, how dare she respond in that way, even though the protesters were interrupting her, right? So it doesn't matter what these people are going to do. It doesn't matter what they choose. Ultimately, it's going to anger a very significant part of the base. And that's why, especially when it comes from the Muslim side of things, Michigan's a must-win state for this upcoming election. And there's a lot of the uncommitted delegates, they're coming from Michigan. And so she has the potential to lose that state over this very issue. And that's why she's tried to be more conciliatory towards their demands. But again, as soon as she did that, with potentially being open to a meeting to have an arms embargo, the Jewish left just, they had their own meltdown over that. So it's a rock and a hard place. I don't envy them. And that's why it's just crazy that from 1968, we kind of have another set of conditions where it can have a very high likelihood it's going to be a chaotic DNC.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because, if you're just listening to the mainstream press, you'd think everyone and their mother loves Kamala and there's no dissension whatsoever. But as you rightly point out, this dissension is still there, and that might be surprising to some people. And speaking of which, for those who don't know, since Julio came on, this is sort of your own personal Super Bowl, right? For the year, because this is what you do, and you do look forward to it. Nonetheless, you're going to, I assume, be keeping very safe this next week, and we hope it goes well.
Julio, the final word.
Yeah, this is something that I've been looking forward to for over a year. It's basically as soon as I found out that Chicago was going to be where it's going to be held, and with this issue being at the forefront. So we'll be out there. We'll try to get as close to the chaos as we can to show the viewers what it's like. But this is something that I've been anticipating for a very, very, very long time.